I am Stefan Żółkowski, printer in Warsaw and reserve officer in Polish Air Force. My life is turned upside down today. 1st September 1939. I hear Radio Warsaw.
The General Staff has issued the following communique, number 1, at 6:15 p.m. On the 1st of September 1939, at dawn, the Germans crossed into our territory. German Air Force and regular army unexpectedly invaded Polish territory without a declaration of hostilities. In the early morning, the German airplanes attacked a number of towns all over Poland. The German airmen have bombed.
I pack back quickly and take tram to Okęcie aerodrome, but gates are locked and all planes gone. We officers are taken to Służewiec racecourse and there are 300 men here. We camp for 2 nights and our commander says, "Go and say goodbye to your families." So I have good meal with my parents and then father comes with me to tram stop. It is the last time I see him. We can hear bombs near city, but we get to Warsaw East railway station. We pass British embassy and many people cheering. Britain has declared war on Germany. This is a start of 10-month, 9,000 miles journey through Southeast Europe, Middle East, France and North Africa before I reach Britain to fight against German bastards.
In 2019, 80 years after Stefan began his flight for freedom, my wife and I set off to follow his diary and his odyssey, retracing his footsteps from Warsaw. We drove through France, Belgium and Germany, crossing the border into Poland where the German army and tanks had invaded 8 decades ago. Today, Warsaw is a modern cosmopolitan city with no sign of the destruction it experienced in World War II or the bleak communist period which followed.
Już było bardzo ciemno, mój Boże, co z tego? Po prostu nie spostrzegłam, że przecież...
With my friends and comrades, we ride east by train from Warsaw.
Myślała, jak napisać do niego.
Suddenly, outside the city, we hear the noise of planes and Stuka bombers attacked our train. We jump out from the carriage and take cover in ditch. We are angry and afraid because engine is smashed and off tracks. Then we find old truck and we want to keep moving east, but soon we must run and shelter in woods. Another plane is trying to kill us. We arrive in Siedlce. It is my hometown, but it is on fire. We see the church where I was baptized, but we have no time to stop. We must keep going to Brześć. We travel by night, and in daytime we hide in woods and by rivers. When we get to aerodrome at Brześć, the commander is panicking, and he say, "No, you must go. You must go south through Romania. Go from here." In 8 days we reach border near Zaleszczyki, but no fuel left in truck. Then we very lucky. We find old British Leyland bus and set off on very bad roads through Romania. It is a long journey to Bucharest. We go to city because I want to get Polish passport to leave Romania. And I need French visa so we can go into France. That is where we want to go next.
We found the tram stop where Stefan had said a hurried goodbye to his father for the very last time. Over the Wisła River we went, to Warsaw Station East. And 30 kilometers out of the city, we discovered the railway track where he had been bombed by the Stukas, and there beside it, a deep ditch where he had hidden with his comrades. Now in Ukraine, it took us 14 hours to reach the Romanian border, and for much of the way, the roads were abysmal and dangerous. In 2007, Romania joined the European Union, and now its roads are superb, matching or surpassing those of Britain. Ceausescu, the communist dictator, ruled it as a totalitarian state between 1967 and 1989, and his monumental palace still dominates the ancient city of Bucharest. We made our way to the Polish embassy, where Stefan and his colleagues queued with hundreds of others for 2 frustrating days, until he received his priceless passport. We also found the French embassy, where he was able to get his visa to enter France. But the question was, how to get to France?
I have now grown beard and take off my Polish Air Force uniform, so I do not look like military man. I have been given papers and we must go to port of Constanta on Black Sea. We go by train, then march to Tulcza, small town on start of Danube Delta as it flows into Black Sea. Its wide, marshy swamp stretching for kilometers and with banks of rushes, and it is infested with malaria mosquitoes and not possible to pass. In Constanta, we must hide in hotel and only go out one at a time because there are many Germans there. I have 10 men to look after and we must go tomorrow to port and find our ship, the Transylvania, which will take us away from Romania. We sail and ship is passenger boat with very good food, the best in 3 months. And we go by Istanbul, Marmara and Aegean to Piraeus in Greece. Captain say we will stay for 3 hours. So I find tram going to Athens. And when I get off, I see wide boulevard stretching into distance. And there on hill, Parthenon. It is such beautiful sight, and I'm quite overcome with joy of seeing it. I hurry back to ship, and we set sail for Beirut. It is lovely and exciting. It's called Paris of the East, and there are many ships and noisy people.
In Constanta, we met up with Adrian Popescu, a shipping company owner whose father had sailed on Stefan's ship, the Transylvania, in the 1960s. He arranged private access to the port, and we were able to pass through the same gates Stefan had used to leave Romania. We were not able to replicate the sea voyage they had then made. There's no passenger service anymore to Greece or beyond. Instead, we drove along the enchanting coastal roads through Bulgaria to Istanbul. The bunting was out for us as we crawled our way into that huge metropolis with a population of 15 million. It straddles Europe and Asia, and its colourful, vibrant and noisy atmosphere makes it one of the world's great cities. We loved the ferry trip on the Bosporus, perhaps the most celebrated waterway on earth. But Stefan's ship passed through at night, with he and his colleagues still anxious and fearful about what they had left behind. They would have been happy to keep on moving, on towards Athens. We kept Stefan's sea route in sight as we crossed into Greece, passing Andropoli and Thessaloniki before swinging down towards Mount Olympus, overlooking the Aegean Sea. We drove up into the silent higher reaches of the home of the gods, and came across the ancient monastery of Agios Dionysius, established in 1542 and hidden in a deep gorge. When Stefan's ship passed by Mount Olympus, it would be another 18 months before Germany invaded Greece, and then 2 years more before the Wehrmacht bombed and demolished this sacred place. En route to Athens, we made another side trip to see the reconstructed railway bridge at Gorgopotamos. Operation Harling was a joint offensive by the British Special Operations Executive and the Greek resistance to stem the flow of supplies through Greece to German forces in North Africa, and the viaduct was blown up in November 1942. The landscape approaching Athens is principally agricultural, filled with productive olive groves, vineyards and cotton fields. In Athens' industrial area, we persuaded a guard to let us into the heart of the port of Piraeus. Then, just as Stefan had done, we climbed aboard a tram and headed for the Acropolis, trekking up to the Parthenon with thousands of other tourists. In November 1939, there might have been a handful of sightseers, but a sudden torrential downpour chased away those around us, and we were left with the same privileged view that he might have had. After 4,000 miles and 22 days, we had to leave our trusty Nissan Micra at Athens airport. The only feasible way to access Beirut in 2019 was by air, so once again we were unable to replicate Stefan's sea voyage. We were really looking forward to visiting Lebanon, because most choose to avoid this ancient land because of the perceived threat of abduction or worse.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Beirut. The local time is 20 minutes to 1 o'clock and the outside temperature is 21 degrees Celsius.
We get off ship and we are billeted in barracks of French African troops for 2 days. Many Poles here already, and food good, but a bit too spicy. Next day we go into Old City and find beautiful park with huge cedar trees, like picture book of Lebanon. Next morning we must go to port again, and only ship we see is wonderful French liner, the Champollion. It is for us, and we are so happy as we leave for Jaffa, Alexandria and France. When a ship is in Alexandria, I have first terrible attack of malaria and I feel I want to die. But French doctor gives quinine tablet and slowly I am better. As we sail, they say there is a danger from German submarines, so we pass close to Sicily and Sardinia. We arrive in Marseille and I am happy to get my papers to enter France.
Although Lebanon has deep political and economic problems, Beirut was a revelation. It's got a lively, cosmopolitan atmosphere with busy streets filled with stylish restaurants and shops. A broad and winding corniche hugs the azure Mediterranean coastline, and it's packed with grand hotels and high-rise apartments. There's also a less glamorous side to Beirut. The disastrous 1975 to 1990 civil war left damaged buildings, like the Holiday Inn Hotel, as memorials to the bitter fighting. There's a strong military presence, which has left politically sensitive areas of the city close to the President's Palace and the old Jewish quarter empty and sealed off to all traffic and sightseers. Even the vast Horsch Park in the city, which had so impressed Stefan, is an encampment for army personnel, and it's constantly patrolled by gun-toting soldiers. We threw caution to the wind and hired a car to drive to Baalbek, a site of unrivaled Roman ruin. It's 90 kilometers west of Beirut and close to the Syrian border. The road through the fertile Bekaa Valley is dangerous and worrying. Lebanese drivers quite openly use both sides of the carriageway, but there are also many army checkpoints, guns and tanks. We passed numerous small refugee camps built alongside the Damascus highway and packed with Syrian civilians, both old and very young. The Bekaa Valley and Baalbek are the home of Hezbollah, considered by many to be a terrorist organisation, but part of the governing coalition in Lebanon. The complex of temples at Baalbek is a UNESCO World Heritage Centre. This was Heliopolis from the Greco-Roman period and dedicated to Venus, Mercury and Jupiter. It is one of the most impressive surviving testimonies to the Roman Empire anywhere in the world. After the uplifting glory of Baalbek, we became quite despondent as we returned to Beirut and met up with two of Lebanon's major environmental concerns: dense traffic jams and the scourge of litter piled by the roadsides, with millions of plastic bottles strewn across the landscape. But the next morning we awoke with much improved feelings about Beirut and what we had seen of the interior. Stefan had been limited to 2 days in the city, while we had 3, and the opportunity to travel inland by car. That had been challenging and somewhat chaotic, but we found the Lebanese warm and friendly, and the urban and Bekaa Valley landscapes fascinating. On the night of our 51st wedding anniversary, we had some of the best fish and chips we'd ever eaten, cooked Lebanese style in a trendy Beirut bistro. Stefan had set sail for Egypt aboard the Champollion liner, but we had to fly to Cairo and then cross the desert by taxi to Alexandria. We survived the frantic traverse through Cairo, past densely populated high-rise flats, but also with glimpses of the majestic River Nile. We left our bags at our hotel in Giza and commissioned a taxi for our journey to Alexandria and a one-night stopover there. Stefan had spent a miserable 2 days in Alexandria in November 1939, aboard his ship but struck down with malaria. Our experience was refreshingly different in this ancient port city beside the Mediterranean, founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BC. The seascapes were exhilarating, and the Corniche, with its elegant colonial architecture, was a glorious surprise in this otherwise hot and dusty country. From the outset of our travels, we planned to follow Stefan's route as closely as possible. So, as we were unable to go from Egypt to France, we flew instead to Tunis. This was our shortest stopover, just 18 hours, but we fell in love with the city, its souk and the wonderful Bardo Museum, packed with Roman mosaics. Between Romania and France, Stefan and his comrades used passenger ships for their escape. From Tunis, we ourselves were able to follow an important section of his route by sea as foot passengers aboard the Daniel Casanova ferry to Marseille. As we sailed through the night across calm seas, we had time to think about how Stefan might have felt in November 1939. He would have been anxious, but excited by the thought of joining France in its fight against Germany. But the following 4 months were characterised by boredom and a growing frustration with the French. He and his colleagues boarded the train for Lyon at Marseille station.
At aerodrome, there are hundreds of Polish officers and airmen just walking about or standing around talking about the chance of some kind of work. Our pilots want to fly again, but there are no planes at all. It is surprising and shocked that the French do not know what to do with us. They say the Poles have caused the war. They have lost their country and now they want to occupy France. We spent 3 months at Bronn with nothing to do, but at Christmas I sent parcel to my father in Poland. I do not know if he is still alive. We have had no news since September. But we do know that the Nazis have crushed Warsaw and life is like hell.
We arrived at Bronn in the middle of a torrential thunderstorm and found the old airfield with its World War II hangars still being used, but now part of an industrial estate. These were the buildings where Polish airmen pleaded for work, but it seemed that their French hosts had little stomach for the fight against the Nazis, who were to occupy France 3 months later. In Lyon, we stayed in a tiny hotel, just as Stefan had done, but through a severe winter. There was no heating, and they had little money for food, and they spent their days aimlessly. Their spirits were low.
At beginning of March, we are suddenly given French Air Force uniforms, and they tell us we will go to a factory in Limoges to rebuild aircraft engines. 200 of us go by train from Lyon, and when we arrive at Limoges station, we are given papers and taken to the base aérienne de l'Armée de l'Air. It is very big place, with gates guarded by military police. When our men are settled, we officers find small hotel in town, and it is good to have comfortable bed and warm room. Next day is official welcome party with bands who play Polish and French national anthems. But as we begin work, we see French people do not like to hurry. They say to us, doucement, slow down, and they spend a lot of time in toilets. We find they are drinking wine and brandy. They also try to sabotage our work. When we bring in engine for rebuild, we test it and the whole thing blows up. Then we find that sand has been put in the engine by French workers. Although work is difficult, we are able to visit Holy Shrine at Lourdes, where we pray for our families and for our own future. We know that Germans have invaded France and are moving south toward us.
We left Lyon and followed the railway line Stefan had used to get to Limoges, and found our B&B next to the spectacular Gare de Benedictine. Next morning, and armed with a modern-day map, we set out to find the industrial aviation complex where the Polish contingent had worked as the Third Reich began its assault on France. The still extant earthworks of a huge reservoir proved we had found our goal. Limoges is renowned for its porcelain industry and may have been the inspiration for Stefan's later career as a shopkeeper, selling fine china and antiques. We know from his diary that he visited several potteries during his time there.
Die Straßen westlich von Lüttich sind bald dicht besetzt mit den vorrückenden Formationen unseres Heeres.
In June 1940, we hear that Germans have broken treaty with France and are mobilizing troops. Our Polish commander meets us, and we all decide that we must leave France and try to get to Britain. The last train to depart from Limoges leaves the next morning. I am sick all night from malaria and I cry because I think I cannot go. But my friend Wacek makes me get up from my bed. The station is full of people and the French shout at us. The Poles! They are escaping again! And they try to stop us from getting on train. But we leave and in 2 days we are in Toulouse. There we find 200 more Polish men from another aircraft factory and we all want to go south to Mediterranean coast. When we leave train, we have to march 2 miles to beach and we find old Spanish Civil War camp for refugees and there are beds and straw to sleep on. But we are bitten by many insects, lice and bugs, so we shake blankets and go to sleep on clean sand. Next morning, we return to port and our group captain has arranged 2 large fishing boats for us. We must leave straight away and we will go to Oran in Algeria. It will take 3 days.
Having found the aviation complex in Limoges, where Stefan had worked in the spring of 1940, we took to the road again, following his route through the pastoral landscapes of the Dordogne and Garonne. It was important for us to see Lourdes, as it had left a significant impression on him. We drove through the dramatic foothills of the Pyrenees, but almost ran out of fuel as we had to coast 5 miles downhill into the most celebrated of all Catholic pilgrimage sites. Saint Bernadette was canonized just 7 years before Stefan's visit in 1940, and the shrine at Lourdes then would have been a relatively insignificant affair. In 2019, it is big business, and we joined 40,000 other pilgrims on a memorable and emotional torchlight procession. Lourdes had a huge impact on us, for although we had visited Catholic shrines in Częstochowa in Poland and in Norfolk in England, the scale of mass dedication at St Bernadette's Grotto was overwhelming. We reflected upon that experience as we passed through the medieval cities of Carcassonne and Nîmes towards our French destination at Port-Vendre and Argelès-sur-Mer. We arrived on the beach at Argelès-sur-Mer in the far southwest of France on a bright warm morning, to walk where Stefan had slept and suffered bed bugs and lice in the old internment camp in early winter. 8 decades ago, this was the scene of one of the Spanish Civil War's great tragedies, where 100,000 men, women and children fleeing from Franco's troops were interned. Many diseases were prevalent and conditions were unbearable. It was common to see bodies piled up and left to rot around the camp. We entered Port-Vendre the next day, and here was the railway line from Toulouse, which allowed hundreds of Polish airmen to find an exit route from Europe. Today, the coastal town is a focus for holidays, but as well as recreational boats in the harbour, we found the modern-day equivalent of Stefan's escape vessel, an anchovy and sardine trawler. Did he leave his train here and perhaps have his papers checked by the port authorities before boarding his boat bound for North Africa?
The weather is very hot, so we sleep on deck of boat. It is now 9 months we travel, and we are so very tired. But when we arrive in Oran, we are happy. We have left France and Germans behind. But we must keep moving, and there are trains to take us over Atlas Mountains to Morocco. When we get out of train, we find huge open space with tables, and there are bands and reception committee with French generals and officers. There are speeches to welcome us, and they say how Poles and French have been fighting together against common enemy. And we all shout, "Niech żyje Francja! Long live France!" And we get delicious French meal with wine, of course. We do not go into Medina in Marrakesh, but we have to sleep in train for one night, and next day our train crosses desert. It's very hot and sun blazing down. We leave train in Casablanca and they tell us we must sleep on grass by station. But at night it's freezing cold, even with my coat and 2 blankets. We stay in Casablanca for 2 days, and my dreams of romantic city are ruined. It's filthy and smelly. We are taken to port in lorries, and we pray for a lovely French liner. But instead we find a dirty British coal ship. When we get on board, we find no comfortable beds, just steel deck, where we will sleep with 2 blankets and our suitcases for pillow. There are so many bodies packed on ship, but we are happy to be with the British at last.
There was no viable sea ferry from France to Algeria for us. In addition, the British government was advising against all but essential travel to the country. Threats of anti-Western activity, including kidnapping and targeted attacks, were high-risk possibilities. So we chose a cautious approach to following Stefan's route through Africa's and the Arab world's largest state by flying over it and the Atlas Mountains, from Marseille to Marrakesh.
خرجوني من الدار تبعت الزين ديالي غزال الخطر نظرة عينيها تقتل شدوني غادي نهب.
From the peace and coolness of our Riyadh hotel, we were able to gaze across the 21st century rooftops of this magical city, which in the time of Stefan's visit was under the control of the Vichy government in France. In the streets of the Medina below, with its alleyways, souks and secret gardens, we were entranced by the colour and vivacity. In 1940, there was a high degree of poverty and deprivation, with the remnants of slavery and suppression of the Jewish community confined in their mellah. Although we enjoyed the hours spent as tourists, we were still on our mission to follow Stefan's route to his departure point from North Africa. So we headed for the impressive and modern Marrakesh railway station and booked our tickets to Casablanca. This section of Stefan's journey would have been uncomfortable and frustratingly slow as his packed steam train puffed its way across the northwest Maghreb desert in sweltering heat. By contrast, our transportation was in air-conditioned luxury aboard the speedy and electrified Casablanca Express, with its panoramic windows, friendly refreshment service and interesting travel companions. In World War II, Casablanca was the city of intrigue and spies, but today it is Morocco's biggest city and one of the great financial centres in Africa. It has one of the largest artificial ports in the world, and it's from here that Stefan and his colleagues departed on the final and dangerous leg of his odyssey to Britain in July 1940.
Our ship leaves Casablanca and we are alone on Atlantic. We will go to Gibraltar and wait in Mediterranean for British convoy. On a ship, We have only one Polish-English phrasebook, which we must all share, and we take turns to copy words and learn strange new language. About midday, we reach Gibraltar, and there are many ships waiting for the Royal Navy destroyer and other craft which will protect us. Then we sail in wide arc into Atlantic to avoid German planes and U-boats. In spite of this, 2 of our convoy of 20 ships are sunk before we get to Britain. After 300 days of our long and difficult journey is nearly over, we are close to England. Now, our ship is sailing up Wide River, but Captain says, "Welcome to Scotland." It is not England, and we are surprised. This is Glasgow. We unload from ship, and they take us by buses to large park in city, where we live for 1 week in tents. It is more comfortable than ship's deck, and we are not seasick anymore. We rest, but start to feel frustrated again because no action. Then Royal Air Force officer says we will go to Blackpool, because all Polish airmen go there for distribution and training. Blackpool is holiday place and very busy, but soon I find my friends and fellow officers and we try to make best plans for us. I learn I will go back to Scotland, to Grangemouth. We will soon have to leave Blackpool and go to aerodrome all over Britain. Although we still think about our family and friends in Poland, we know we must try to be happy here. So we must try to enjoy ourselves and perhaps meet nice English girls, so we can learn how to speak new language. We go to dance in Winter Garden Ballroom. It's a very popular place with hundreds of people. It is my lucky night, because on the dance floor I find love of my life. And I know that England will be my new home.
To get to Glasgow, then Blackpool for Morocco, was clearly out of the question to go by sea. There are no passenger boats, and even if there were, sailing in the Atlantic and through the Bay of Biscay in October was not an option for travellers with unreliable sea legs. So we continued by train from Casablanca to the capital Rabat, and then by air to Glasgow, leaving the intoxicating warmth of North Africa behind us and finding dreich, cold and wet autumnal weather in Scotland's largest city. On rain-washed cobblestones, we stood beneath Glasgow's iconic Finnieston Crane and beside the grey River Clyde. It was here that Stefan first set foot in Britain at the end of his great odyssey. He had spent a week in the city, resting and coming to terms with the new reality. He and his colleagues were in a country which would continue the fight against the horrors of Nazi oppression, and Polish airmen, like him, would make a significant and valuable contribution to that cause. En route to Blackpool, we drove along the Firth of Clyde, experiencing the seascapes he would have seen. The beach at Blackpool won't have changed since Polish airmen in their hundreds strolled along the promenade and took in the sea air, and the tower still dominates the town. But we weren't bothered with donkey rides on the beach or candy floss along the Golden Mile. After following in his footsteps through Southeast Europe, Lebanon and Egypt, France and North Africa, we wanted to step onto the dance floor at the Winter Gardens ballroom and sense the moment when my father, a dashing Polish Air Force officer, found refuge and love in the arms of a warm-hearted young English nurse. Stefan's arduous journey from Poland to Blackpool might have reached its conclusion in the Winter Gardens ballroom, but ours was far from over. The very next day, we left chilly Manchester to return to sunny Athens. We hadn't forgotten our lonely little car parked at the airport there. We now had to drive the 2,000 miles back to our home in England over the following 10 days, travelling through countries we'd not set foot in before and might never visit again. It was a rare opportunity. In Greece, we fell in love with Larissa, and we found North Macedonia's capital, Skopje, stunning. In Belgrade, we were befriended by a charming waiter, but in beautiful Budapest, the stag parties kept us awake. In Salzburg, we got stuck into schnitzels, and Sunday in Stuttgart was as silent as the grave. We were locked out by traffic jams in Luxembourg, but found an old friend in Le Touquet. Back in England, we headed for our home in Norfolk. Following in Stefan's footsteps, we had travelled 25,000 kilometres through 21 countries in 54 days. And during each of those days, we tried to understand how he might have felt having to abandon one life in Poland and establish a new one in this country.
Winifred and I are married October 1941, while I train in Grangemouth, Spitfire and Merlin engine to become technical instructor for Polish pilots. I learn my father is dead and many friends and family missing. My brother Janek, army officer, has been murdered by Russians at Katyn. We spent next 2 years moving around different aerodrome in England, in County Durham, Gloucestershire, London and Suffolk. We now have family with 2 boys, Julek and Sandy. I thank God when the Germans who smashed my country are beaten and war is over. I am demobbed from Air Force and we want to stay in Norfolk. So at 40 years old, I become British citizen and I feel very happy and safe. Poland is now a communist state and we are afraid that government there will hurt our families because we choose to stay in Britain. So I changed my name to Odell. Win and I choose this name from phone book. Odell is also easy for English people because we opened small shop below our house in Norwich. Over 20 years, Win and I built business with 5 glass and china shops. First Italian espresso bar in Norfolk, and we also repair damaged antiques. We helped to establish Norwich International Club and Anglo-Polish Club and make many friends from all over world. As we get older together, my love for Win grows stronger, and our children makes us proud grandparents. Then my heart is broken. My darling wife and dancing partner for 60 years, since we held each other close in Blackpool, has gone, quite unexpectedly. After a long life, full of adventure, drama, danger and happiness, I am now sad. I have lost my strength and will to carry on.
My father recorded the details of his escape from Poland and his journey to Britain in a diary written just after the war. My mother had insisted that he document the Odyssey and had then translated it from Polish to English. We spent 6 months researching and planning the route in meticulous detail, rather like a military operation, to make sure that our almost non-stop campaign passed through every city, town, village and location mentioned in his journal. While I planned the route over which we would drive for over 8,000 miles, my wife Jane took responsibility for booking 31 hotels, 7 airline flights, 4 rental cars, 2 ferries and a train journey across the Maghreb Desert in northwest Morocco. Stefan's diary was clearly the inspiration for us to follow in his footsteps. But what was our motivation? We wanted to pay tribute to him and the 17,000 Polish Air Force men and women who had left their homeland, taking innumerable and complex routes to come to the aid of Britain as she tried to defeat the Nazi oppressors. Using their wits to stay alive and avoid detection, and often living in grim conditions, they travelled on trains, by foot or on buses, aboard freighters and trawlers, passenger liners and coal ships. Of course, our journey, following the route he took, was not subject to any of the hardships faced by my father, but it did give us the opportunity to experience and understand the cultures and landscapes through which many of those brave individuals had passed.
When we arrived in Poland at the start of our adventure, Adrian's Polish family gave us such a warm welcome and built up our strength with almost overwhelming amounts of delicious traditional food. In fact, as someone who has always been interested in cooking, we made sure that at each stage of our travels we ate the local fare. Few of our meals were in fancy, fine dining restaurants, but rather it was street food in Istanbul and seafood on the promenade in Alexandropoli, northeast Greece, or the spicy omelette in Casablanca railway station, which live in our memories.
There were many emotional moments too, such as walking through the same port gates in Constanta which Stefan used to board his ship and leave Romania, standing on the Corniche in Alexandria where he was first struck down with malaria, or when we sank our feet into the warm sand on Argelès-sur-Mer beach, site of the horrific Spanish Civil War internment camp, where he and his comrades were bitten alive by bedbugs, lice and fleas.
We spent time in iconic locations, high on Mount Olympus, among the glorious ruins of Lebanon's Baalbek Roman heritage site, in a candlelit procession at Lourdes, or the bustling souk in Tunis, and the bazaars of Marrakesh and Rabat. But the most poignant by far was when Adrian and I held each other on the now empty dance floor in the Winter Gardens Ballroom, Blackpool, just as Wynne had held Stefan 80 years before.
My father died, aged 94, and 4 years after Wynne, his beloved wife and my mother. He was a man with old-fashioned ideas, but with the ability to embrace new opportunities which came his way. He was at once stubborn, impatient and restless, yet loving, proud, patriotic, strong, determined and sustained by his faith. This film is my tribute to him and made with love and respect for an admirable man.
Chłopiec panny suka, spozira przybira i nosa zadzira. Wodiri di na, wadiri di na.